Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for coming back after lunch. And I know that some of you had quite a heavy lunch from what I saw just now in the room next door. But I hope that the session will be as interesting and as informative as the one previously. It's going to be a tough act to follow Datuk Som. I mean, he really put a lot of interesting questions out there. We are actually on Slido, so please do send your questions over and I'll try to get through as many of them within the time period that we actually have. So with us, we actually have 4 panelists over here who are very well versed with data insights. And one of the things that I wanted to do differently was actually to make the connection, as I was telling the panelists here, data being one, but what do you do with data? So I'm going to start off with a quote, and let's see if you actually know where this quote comes from. You see, there is only one constant, one universal. It is the only truth. Causality. Action, reaction. Cause and effect. Any thoughts? It's by the Merovingian in the movie The Matrix. So at the end of the day, when we talk about data, because the Merovingian was actually the trafficker of information, it is perfect information that makes decisions and action simpler and easier.
So I think, ladies and gentlemen, so we want to frame this afternoon's panel session in terms of how to get to a situation whereby the right stakeholders get the right information at the right time. So gentlemen, welcome. So I'm going to start my questions running around. The topic is data powers everything that we do. And if we have perfect information, where would that lead us? How would businesses be when we have perfect information?
Hi, thanks Ernest. So the question was, where would business be if we have perfect data?
Perfect information and perfect data. I mean, that's the utopia, right?
Yeah. Okay, so I think that comes back to the current problems which businesses are facing now. And every one of them, they speak about that there's not enough data. And the question that I always ask is like, what do you do if I do give you the data? So in the sense of, if it is perfect information, what can they do with it? So I think, in the sense of property, when it comes to property, the biggest issue, which I think the morning they kind of mentioned it, was kind of like, we have half-sided data, right? We have got very strong supply information, and everyone is talking about demand. And in my mind was like, okay, what if eventually we do provide all that demand data? Where would these companies be? Where would the stakeholders be? Where would developers, agents, and buyers, sellers, government bankers be? Right? So I think with perfect data, number one, the first thing which I think will be elevated is confidence. So in the sense of when it comes to buyers and sellers, there's a confidence to move forward. When it comes to businesses like an agent business, what we face a lot of problem in the market is turnaround time in closing deals. So cash flow for agents is a big issue in today's market. When it comes to developers and bankers, I think we can see an improved conversion rates because they can kind of pinpoint who they can identify as a high conversion rate and bring them forward faster. So they can kind of like processes become seamless because they can identify data, they can identify potential before they actually go through the whole process itself. And I think when it comes to the government, I think the huge benefit for them is transparency. So when it talk about building a healthier property market, so with this information, the market will be healthier. And I think moving towards a developed nation, I think that's going to help with the government itself. So just kind of like sum it up all the stakeholders itself.
Afternoon everyone, my name is Farouk Abdullah from the Natural Intelligence Solution. We don't deal with much about property, but we know about data. So the answer to that question is, with all the clients that we work with regionally, no one has perfect data. And no one has perfect insights as well. And the reason I say this is because I'm going to tell you a quick story. We all as Malaysians, or Asians in general, we all like food. And whenever everyone sometimes comes to me and says, my clients come to me and says, hey, I've got all this data, what can you do for me? I use this very simple analogy. If you could just think about your fridge at home, right? The fridge at home. We all have fridges, yeah? 2019. We open the fridge, right? What can you cook with the ingredients in your fridge right now at home? Okay, since you say this morning, right? And the reason why I ask this is that in my fridge on a Saturday morning, you probably can make at best an omelette with some random ingredients in it. I've got 4 hungry children, 3 boys. They eat the whole thing. They can eat the fridge, they eat the fridge. Yeah? So my question has always been this. Don't ask me what I can do with your ingredients, but tell me what you want to eat first. Right? If you tell me you want a char kway teow, I will go get the ingredients for you. Right? If you tell me you want a Hainanese chicken rice, whether it's Singaporean or Malaysian, who knows, then I will go on and get the ingredients for you. So my approach to all this, and to answer the question directly, is very simple. There's no such thing as perfect ingredient. If you ask me what's the perfect ingredient and how can you move forward, and I'll say, well, what do you want to be? You want to sell char kway teow? You want to sell satay? What is it that you want? Then I'll go get the ingredients for you. And that's always the analogy that you got to take off from when you come to data and analytics. The data itself are just ingredients. The ingredients you can find, you can buy, you can borrow, you can steal. But what is it that you want to cook first, which is very, very important. So when you have the perfect ingredients, and you have the perfect menu of what you want to cook, and then that makes a perfect scenario where you will then take advantage of that and be ahead of the competition. But forever, if you keep saying there isn't enough data, then you will never be able to cook what you want to cook. I.e., whatever your business is trying to achieve, you will never achieve it because you keep saying there's not enough ingredients. Thanks.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. That was a pretty good analogy of food as one of the things, and kind of extending on to what you said, right? Especially with the ease of how quickly you can store the data and collect it. A lot of these people have collected volumes and volumes of data without thinking into, hey, what is going to be my end state looking at it. And finally, it comes down to quality, right? What is the quality and the granularity that you have collected the data with? In my career, oftentimes I've seen that, hey, we end up collecting a lot of things, knowing, hey, where we want to go. But, hey, when we kind of get there, we realize that, hey, I didn't have good quality data or I didn't have the right granularity with it. Even when you kind of assume that, hey, with all these new frameworks, these new technologies, I am able to kind of, wave a magic wand and solve some of those areas, it's that trust, right? Whether it's internal or whether it's external to your customers or developers or agents, right? How much are they willing to trust the data, right? How much do they trust the process that you have made the data go through? And then what is the outcome that they are going to believe in? And that doesn't come easy. That, even with, assuming I have a perfect world where I have everything that I need, the trust is still a few years away. And, that takes a lot of time and effort to make sure that, hey, people end up trusting your data and end up making decisions based out of it, right? So all in all, kind of circles back to the same story. It's like, hey, what quality you are going to get, and then how are people going to trust the data on which they are going to make decisions out of it.
Well, hi everyone, my name is Quek. I'm the co-founder of MHub. Since we just had our heavy lunch, I'll go back to the analogy of eating and cooking. Yeah, but I'll come from different perspective. Yes, just now our panelists mentioned about the cooking. Yes, I mean data is like ingredients, so you just need to look for the ingredients you want to cook, what menu you want to cook, then you look for those ingredients and cooked it. So I'm coming from different perspective of let's say char kway teow. Alright, for a stall, a seller or char kway teow stall, chef, they want to set up a stall, alright? So he needs to know who is actually going after, or which area, or which kind of population, or what kind of age profile wants to buy this char kway teow at what time, right? At what location? So without this, we call it demand data. All right. So even you have the supply data, the ingredient. So I'm talking in terms of demand data. It's like, oh, I want to eat char kway teow. Usually people eat during noon time for lunch. Right? Maybe different location have different appetite. Right? So maybe different pricing. So for us to pull all this data, there's ingredient for the chef to cook sell at what kind of pricing. Maybe Bangsa, you want to sell at a higher price. Kampong, you cannot sell more than 5 ringgit per plate. So this has to be demand driven. Yeah, I notice why I'm saying this is actually reflect the same back to property sales as well, right? A lot of things, especially current issues. You get so many overhang stocks. Why? Because we lack of demand data, right? We do not know, do not understand what exactly the profile of customer in that particular location. Probably a lot of, we have the past data. Based on NAPIC, based on whatever, but we don't have the actual real demand data. This is actually the current situation in the industry right now. So to me, whoever has this current data or using this current data to do a predictive analysis, they will be the winner in this competitive situation. Thank you.
Coming back to what you just said, Quek, and I just want to open it up to the panelists as well. I mean, we talked about the demand data, you have the supply reality. I think the central bridge that's missing is the ability, the intent. You can have as much demand as possible, but you can't have the facility to go out and get it. It's going to cause your demand to not happen. So the question here is that there's a lot of work that's actually being said, we need more demand data, no more demand data. But what happens to the intent data and the ability data? Is that being addressed?
Sorry, I just missed the question there. So, other data points apart from demand data?
Ability.
Right.
Because people are focusing on the demand and supply.
Yeah.
The most important part that makes it happen is ability.
Yeah.
There's going to be a lot of demand because there's going to be a lot of interest.
Yeah, but ability as in the...
capability.
Oh, okay. Okay, so to answer that question, again, a quick story. I lived in the UK for a very long time, for about 23 years, telling you my age now. Over there, the ratio from population to household is about 2 to 1. So every household has 2 individuals, right? So you got 60 million population, you got about 28 million households. In Malaysia, you have 35 million homes and you have 7 million households, right? So the ratio is about almost 4 to 1. Yeah? So culturally, we are different from the market. So when you're talking about demand data or ability data, what we have to understand is how do we put it into the context of Malaysia right now, okay? So when I came back to Malaysia, I'm not Malaysian, but I came to Malaysia 3 years ago. I was the VP for data analytics for Astro. And Astro says, where are my customers? And I say, where are the households? Okay? And they say, we've got 7 million households and they have 9 million records, right? So there in itself is data, right? So then they said, how do we know who's affordable, who can pay for it, who can buy it, and who can afford it, right? And I said, it's very simple. We get data from Post Malaysia, and we combine the data with Astro's data. We then combine the data with census data, and we have a map now of all the households in Malaysia with their affluent level and their house type. So roughly we know this household has 5 people, and their house type is a bungalow. Don't disturb them, because I think they're quite comfortable, right? This household is a smaller household, but there's a higher composition of people in it, right? So potentially they might move out, but what is their affordability level, right? What can they afford and what they're capable of buying? So there is data out there, right? There is information out there. This information is not, what you got to get out of your head is not information such as just where do I buy ability data, where do I buy demand data. These are all inferred data because no one has exact information of every one of us. Apple roughly knows I use my phone about 4 hours a week, right? Waze roughly knows where I go, right? But roughly, they don't know exactly who I am. So when you look at data, whether it's ability data, capability data, demand data, you have to use, or your data science team have to use their imagination on how they put it together, right? How do you compile it? Because there is data out there. Right? I've profiled the Malaysian population about 3 times already in the last 3 years, including you guys, right? But I don't know who you are, right? I met these guys first time today, but I've probably profiled them already. Okay? So there is information out there and there is data out there. So when someone says I don't have data and I want to look at specific data and I don't have it, there is information out there.
Yeah, coming back to ability, right? So I believe you are talking about borrowing ability or financing ability, to get financing. MHub, we have some experience. We are actually new player compared to the panelists here. So, but for the past few years, we actually do know a lot of all this because we are a hybrid of PropTech and FinTech company. Okay, so in terms of this ability, what is missing actually is, if you look at the current landscape in Malaysia, a lot of, we talk about the financier, the lenders, which is a financial institution, the banks as a whole. So they are actually leveraging on, they are using past data, all right, which is in normal terms, CCRIS data, all right, CTOS data. So these are past data, all right. So, and then what happened to Malaysia right now is there's a lot of people or a lot of consumer, they don't have a past data. For instance, a fresh graduate, right? For fresh grad, maybe earning a decent income of 3,000 or 4,000 now, okay? And I sign a contract with a reputable, or even an SME who has been operating for 20 years. It's a decent job. But how banks rate them? They're gonna rate them as very low score. Or even, in fact, they will put them in the high risk category, right? Why? Just because they don't have past data. They don't have credit cards data. They don't have the repayment data. So they will put them into the, we call it tin file folder, tin file guys or the group. And end of the day, they will fail to get a loan, right? So same goes to a lot of loan applicant, or rather, working adults, or rather employers and employees. If they do not apply credit cards, for instance, or they don't apply any loans, and bank will definitely score them, even they have been working for many years. If they don't have all this data, all right, bank will score them low again because they don't understand them. Right? So what we try to do here is we actually share a lot of all this problem statement with the banks that we work with. We tell them, look, your scoring mechanism or needs to be enhanced. This actually happened in China, and so like for instance a player that we have signed an agreement. We're gonna ink an official agreement with them to provide this alternative scoring data to Malaysia, or to this part of the world. What they do is they actually score a person based on their travel behavior, based on how they spend within an app that they consented to. So these kind of daily payment behavior, I cited an example, this is what they shared. They have a data of those motorbiker, because now concierge service in China is a big thing, all right? But these people may be earning a very low salary, but they are good paymaster because they are very decent. They just work 9 to 9, all right? 9 to 9 every day. They don't do anything. So Chinese, all these data players, they have all this data of where they travel, what they do, how they spend because of WeChat and Alipay and all this. So they will know this person. Oh, for me to work, I want to extend a microfinancing to this person. It's the best candidate because I know where they live, how they do, what kind of traffic pattern or spending they spend. So these are the person who have very low default rate. Yeah, we talk about alternative. If you talk about ability, we are lacking of alternative scoring data in Malaysia. Thank you.
The key points. My two colleagues have already covered. The other piece that want to bring in is for Asians, right? The property is one of the biggest investment that they are going to make, and it's one of the key milestone for a lot of people to be in, right? And like your question pointed out, right? Hey, we are looking at capability and the ability to purchase that property and do something with it. And a lot of times, historically, when we look at some of the industry studies and some of the industry data sets that's come up, the person who's most likely to default is the one who has made his credit card payments on time and is one of the most religious person ever, right? And he says, I'll promises to pay. So, the past performance may not declines, and especially for such a huge purchase, it might not really come up to that. And sometimes it also begs into education, right? Do you understand the quantum that you are undertaking, right? Do you understand, what other expenses come up? It's not just doing your loan payments and, managing your interest rate. There are a lot of other expenses that pop up that you need to account for, and sometimes a lot of those things get lost up. So I would say it's sometimes also got to do with the education on especially with a large purchase like this and an aspirational purchase for a lot of Asians.
No, I think it's a short one. Where I think it's a clear to be very clear on that question, right? There's a difference between what I look at when it comes to demand is that the difference between housing demand and housing needs. So it's a very clear difference in there where when we talk about market preference, especially millennials, and we speak about intent, that form of data is one of those challenges right now, because we can speak about income, but we don't know whether he has the intent to buy next month, and that's one of those challenges which they're facing right now, right?
Absolutely.
Because you can speak about 10% of this earn this many, and this many people are doing that, but do they have the intent to buy? Do they have the intent to rent? And I think in the earlier session, they spoke about why is it that primary market sales is X amount and secondary market sales is X amount, not even realizing that the biggest competitor of a developer of a particular project, say he's launching phase 2, his biggest challenge is actually phase 1. Right? Because everyone is buying sub-sale of phase 1 because the unit's already there. And understanding that market itself will give a clear definition of what is intent. And I think this is where I'd like to take the opportunity to talk about property portals, like Guru and iProperty and Brickz.my and all that, where when we talk about consumer journey, the research element of it is long, right? I mean, I'm sure Setu knows this very, very well. It can take up to 6 months. And that 6 months, intent can change depending on expectation. I expect to buy or stay in a house like this. When I do my research, slowly the expectation changes, the intent changes. And then suddenly you see that we are switched to maybe I should rent first, or before actually buying and all that. So, in the sense of data of intent, I think this is where I think property portals can play a huge role in contributing to the ecosystem itself.
You led me into the second question I wanted to ask, but okay, we'll just pause there for a moment because I wanted to actually bring one point up that Quek mentioned just now. Those data sets that you were mentioning just now, I mean, data at best is, in hindsight, it's 2020. And in hindsight, you could say, we could have done this, we should have done this, or we should be building this. But real estate is very different than, let's just say, FMCG products. You pay your money, you take it, you walk home, and then you cook it. This thing takes probably 3 years to build, takes a lifetime to pay off. How does data that is hindsight perfect going to help with meeting personal needs of the future? I mean, you can have all the data you want on how to make a better candle, but you will never get to a light bulb. What do you think, Quek?
Sorry, I don't quite get the question.
Okay. What I'm saying is that because it's hindsight, data is hindsight.
Yep.
So if you know that you want to go get a loan, and the objective is actually to get a loan, you would do whatever it takes to pass the qualification to get a loan. But that still doesn't mean that you're able to service the loan.
Yep.
So how do you deal with the ability post-buying?
All right. To be honest, we don't. As MHub, we don't. I don't think any of our platform can control user behavior. That's something that really very subjective. I think a lot of people think that data, wow, it's wonderful. I can do a lot of things with data, and yes, we can predict the behavior, right, of a person, what kind of buying pattern they are, whether they are able to service the loan, right, based on the current data and the previous data, and we try to predict in the future. What I'm trying to say is, I think you have to come back to a lot of public education and awareness, right? How to service a loan is a user behavior, all right? This is also, we have initiative in the coming years to come, or the months to come. We want to allow the user or consumer to understand why bank reject them, number one. Number two, to tell them what you can do, like you say, to perfect the situation and come back a few months later and try to apply again. Okay. Number 3, of course, this is ongoing effort. I think all the portals and platforms will try to do, try very hard to do education, to tell them what you can't do, what you can do. Like for instance, very, very simple one, but still a lot of people are doing, like the credit card. Credit cards outstanding. Yeah, you have maybe 10,000 outstanding and you can't service the outstanding of 10,000, but there's a minimum amount you should service, all right? So banks, how banks look at is they look at whether you can service or not. Ability and payment behavior is 2 different things, right? So ability to service is look at your income, right? The payment behavior is the risk, default risk is what happened. So at least, no matter what, you need to pay the minimum amount of that actually incurred to your credit cards. This is a very simple example, but a lot of people still did not do that or miss 1 day or 2 days. Because in terms of the current modeling in secrets or what banks score people is, even if you default by 1 day, 2 days, it's still considered 1 month. I don't care. Because that's how it works. That's how the whole modeling works. All right. That's why, to me, this will not be long. The financial institution is trying a lot of fintech initiative to try to change this, to better predict a person whether he or she will default or not by using alternative data. All right. So of course, there's no one hard and fast rule that you have to base on this data, social media data, how you pay, how you service, how you buy things, how you pay your utility bill to derive your alternative data. I'm pretty sure all banks, especially the big boys, will spend quite a number of investment into this to perfect this score. End of the day, the better risk management it is. End of the day, they try to reduce the NPL, non-performing loans. That's the goal, right? I'm a strong believer in data. I think alternative data will help them to, better score a person and also better predict the behavior, repayment behavior. Thank you.
I like your analogy about the candle and light bulb. And I think we are in that position right now. So I'm gonna go down a philosophical stance a little bit here. If you look at all the industries that's been disrupted, and I just came away from a 2-day conference with accountants, and I tell you that's part of my life. I won't go back again. And what I said to them was that in 5 years' time they will all be out of a job because robotics, AI, intelligence are all going to take over their mundane tasks. Some of them will still have a job, but just at the top layer, and the bottom layer will go off. And what if I said the same thing to you guys, right? So all these estate agents and properties and maybe not the developers themselves, but they will be all out of a job. So if you think of it in that scenario, and to quote Jack Ma, if you're in a market that is already in existence, then you're too late. You have to create a new market for yourself. And I say this because my 13-year-old son cannot understand why the hell do we want to own a house. He cannot understand that. He says, why do you pay every month to own a house? Why do you want to own a house? Just rent it. I said, in 2 years' time, I'll pay off my car. He says, why do you want to own your car? What is it to you? Just rent it, right? So this is a 13-year-old. So in 5, maybe 6, 7, 8 days' time will be your customer. And these are the customers that will say, I don't want to own anymore. I just want to rent. Yeah? So when you think about the market, and I'm not a developer or from the property sector, you need to push yourself to think, what is the new world out there? How would people own businesses? How would people own houses? How would you develop? How quickly can you sell, or do you sell or rent? I mean, one of the questions is, do you oversupply, do you rent it out? That's the question that you have to think about. What is the property market going to look like in 1 or 2 years' time? Not from a demand-supply perspective, but just from the whole ecosystem. And if I can honk this mic for another 2 minutes, it's also from there's one use case that's kicking around all the time: autonomous vehicles and EVs, right? There's one use case which comes out from the conversations in the geeky world that autonomous vehicles and EVs are going to disrupt, obviously, driving licenses and road tax and road networks and traffic lights. Don't need traffic lights anymore, right? Although in Malaysia it doesn't work anyway because the motorbikes just go anyway. But, so it doesn't work, right? There's no more traffic lights. But it's also going to disrupt the property market. Have you seen that? They say that property prices in town centers are going to decrease because people don't mind traveling now. People can go outside because I just sit in the car and work anyway. I don't have to drive. It doesn't matter if my commute is 2 hours because I just work. It's an office. Yeah? So that is already happening and it's starting to happen in some parts of the world, right? So that's just one example of how I think there's an evolution of the market, there's an evolution of the industry that we need to take into consideration. The other one, just one more minute, is that we did, as part of my work in the UK, we did a bit of work with a financial company. And we said, what if they know that you're looking for a house? What if they know that from your phone activities they're looking for a house, right? And they know that you're a bank customer. And then they say that, okay, based on past credit history, we can lend you this amount, which means you get a 5 minutes approval. If you stand in front of the house and they say, okay, I want to buy this house, you say, yes, you can, AIP in 5 minutes, right? And then what happens, they say, actually, your car finance you paid off 3 years ago. So your car now, the finance is 5 years, you paid off 3 years ago, your car is 8 years old. You want to get a new car as well. In fact, we will combine with Astro. So when you move in, there's Astro for 2 years as well, paid. And you get a new car, right? So it becomes a lifestyle, right? The financing company becomes a lifestyle. They finance you for your house, they finance you for your Astro, they finance you for your car, they finance you for everything. What's the property agent going to do? That's using AI. And that's not too far away. But unfortunately, the banks in Malaysia are not there yet, so we still have a chance. Okay? Thanks.
Yeah, you were mentioning to me off panel just now with regard to the change in behavior and the change in business models that will definitely come to disrupt, which is coming in tying back to what Prem was mentioning just now earlier, whereby with fintech, proptech, portals, things will definitely be very, very different. The need to own and the need to stay are two separate conversations altogether. And as what you had said just now, I don't need to own to use it. I can still use it without owning it. So where do you see the development and developers in terms of where they're going to build, what they're going to build in future? I mean, is this going to be tremendously different moving forward for potential models for them?
Okay, so when it comes to in the future, especially of what preference is out there for the millennials and the Z, I'm not going to pretend to know that 100%, but there are a few behaviors we can see today, and it's not so much of a data, but it's more of social elements. Like, for example, in the cases of increased rates of divorce and also in the sense of where the age group, the aging has increased tremendously and the need for single housing units have increased tremendously. So I think, to me, that question has got more of a social analysis to it than there is more of a data analysis to it, And to plug that into what we already have today would be something I don't see happening right now at the moment unless someone actively is able to connect those points. Like what social elements actually affect data points for developers to then precisely build what's required. Because when it comes to demand, I mean, we all know demand runs the show, right? Without demand, supply is useless. Right? Without buyers, supply is meaningless. Right? Buyers run the show. But the factors which affect demand is something which is, when we mention about intent and buying and whether I can then afford to pay the loan, there are so many factors which, the economic factors, the affordability factors, interest rates, overnight interest rates might change, loans increased and all that. It's something which, honestly, personally, I've not ventured that far into that, but right now is where everyone is playing right now is capability, is what Quek was saying. And banks, everyone complains about high rejection loan rates, but they don't understand what is the purpose. Banks are being stringent, and they don't want to revert back to 1998 or 2008 and all that, and that's improved a lot. So, yeah, I wouldn't be able to answer that question unless there's a complete study of social element and the data points.
Well, there's an example, in Japan where the aging population is very high and we are moving towards that direction as well because of the birth rates that's quite coming off. We also will probably be seeing a higher need for single unit housing. Yeah, single unit housing or smaller family housing. So how would that happen, particularly with the older generation that has assets already, to get out of those big bungalows, big semi-Ds and move downgrade if you would call it, but to them maybe it's actually right grade for them. Any thoughts or comments?
You were saying that, like in Japan, mature market.
What I'm saying is that, if, for instance, in the mature market whereby you no longer need a huge bungalow anymore, aging population, you need a right sizing.
Yep.
What happens to the financing is also required for them because they can't borrow any more money.
That's exactly what I mean. You can come to the point I want to mention earlier. Basically, to developers, this is the trend moving forward. You like it or not, we are in a developing country stage, but sooner or later we'll reach a mature stage that the supply demand will just probably match, right? Or there's lesser growth, right? Also because of affordability. Coming back to Ernest's point, I think lately I overheard a few players start sharing this concept of co-living, right? This is something that it's basically it's an area that people can actually venture, because you like it or not. Because affordability is not there, and also let's say the future demand is not there. I'm not going to own it. Why I want to own it? I can just live it for a few months. I'm going to switch to another property, along the street. I'm going to stay for another few months, and I'm going to move. Once I get married, I don't need to worry on selling the house. I can straight away migrate to the next place, or a place that I can settle down. Then only I consider to buy or do a long lease, right? Because the new generation of thoughts is, if I buy, this is compared to older generation, is if I buy a house now, 30 years later, I may not stay in that house. Right? Then my kid's gonna inherit this from me. So end of the day, whatever I invest, my kid's gonna enjoy it. Why? You get what I mean? So that's a lot of YOLO kind of concept. You only live once. Why should I spend so much for my kids? My duty is to support them to graduate, or rather, to make sure they can support themselves. So I shouldn't be worrying on all this. So this is a new trend of thinking. So I think without owning a property in a certain area, but you have to do a proper analysis, based on the data, to come up with this kind of projects, because not everywhere gonna have this can have this kind of demand, right? With the right set of data, right kind of prediction, you should be able to do it.
Setu, you have anything?
So, combining some of the earlier questions that you asked, like, data hindsight is 2020, and then looking into the future, how do you start to work some of these things, right? When you kind of look at the overall pieces, right, one of the key things that always remains back is, those micro neighborhoods that form in those areas, right? So, how do you know that, hey, this sort of community is going to like a certain types of properties, right? Or should I just be, developing more for single ones? And then what are the factors that will make people move there and work from that? And that's, although, we can say, hey, I can gather a lot of data to gather that information, but, disseminating it becomes much, much harder. And it all comes back to, hey, is anybody going to trust it, or is my friend or family has told me that, and that's why I'm going to do it. With the newer trends of kind of going more towards rental, like you can see, hey, Zillow in US, Oyo in India, they've started to kind of do more of those rental models. But I guess the verdict is still out there when for Asians, owning something that big is still as aspirational as it was a few years back.
Thanks. I think the comment is actually quite interesting, and also coming back to what Quek was mentioning with regard to whether the newer or younger generation wants to own or buy. But I think the data that was shared by Mr. Ho Chin Soon some time back with regard to property price movements over the last 20, 30 years, it's by and large upwards and on the uptrend. And depending on where you are, what you've bought, what type of property you've bought, you would have definitely seen home equity appreciate. And therefore, that's your retirement fund, that's the fund that you use to do anything. But I also acknowledge the fact that you don't want to be tied to one location. You may get a job in another country and move on. So echoing from another conversation I've had, do you see the business models changing whereby fractional ownership can happen as well? Whereby I don't need to buy a $500,000 unit myself. Open market.
Interesting point that you brought up, that this is an investment and property prices are going to go up, and when I retire I can sell it. You're assuming a lot.
Yes, absolutely.
Because
yes.
it depends in 30 years' time when people still want to buy a house, or they still live in a house, or they share or whatever, right? So the model and the world that we live in now in Industry 4.0 it's moving in a very quick pace, right? So the assumption that you buy a house now and in 30 years' time it will repay itself back and in some way will fund my pension, right? I've seen some horror stories on this where it doesn't happen and people end up working in supermarkets again, right? And this is true life stories. So I think, the co-sharing concept or the co-investment concept is really good, because how much money do you need in your pension? Is it better put it in property, or is it better? And all that whole investment questions, which is something that you think, well, is it worth doing it, right? But if we bring it back to data and you say, okay, what data do I need to know where I want to build and whether they want to stay and so on and so forth, right? One of the most effective data points that I've used in Malaysia, personally, is traffic data. Okay? Who here don't have a problem with traffic? Don't have a problem with traffic. Yeah, exactly. Yeah? So I live in, I don't know if I can mention this, I live in Eco Park, Setia Eco Park, right? And the Setia Towle, right? It's everybody's nightmare that lives there. Because there are developments after developments. Eco Ardens decide to pull a wall across Eco Setia Park, chased out the monkeys. Now there's monkeys all over the road. And there's ultimate chaos, because further down, Gamuda, I think, is building something, and Setia is building another one. They go into some sort of war again, territorial war, and all this whole thing, right? And then the traffic gets crazy. So I have to leave at 3 today, sorry. Because if I don't leave at 3 today, by the time I get home at 9 at night, right? So I've realized that when I studied traffic behaviors, and this one you can get from Google. Google it, right? You look at it and you understand where the traffic behaviors are. Because in buying that house, the house is the house is the house. I'll give you a very quick story. I'm going to hog the mic again. A property developer came to me and says, how do I understand which buyers are my potential buyers when they walk in the showroom? I said, okay, I'll tell you that next week. Why? Because I went to the showroom, I went to this condominium. It's a very nice condominium in the middle of town. I won't mention who it is. And I said, oh, I'm interested to buy property. 5.5 million condominium, top floor, show me. They show me the condominium. Guess what's in it? Living room? Yeah. Kitchen? Yep. Toilet? Yep. Bedroom? Yeah. I said, what's the difference between yours and the one opposite? They also have bedroom? Yeah. Condominium? Living room? Yeah. Kitchen? Yeah. Toilet? Yeah. So what's the difference? What are you selling me that I'm paying 5.5 million for, that I can go across the road and buy as well? Right? How's the traffic around here? Traffic is crazy. Why would I want to stay there? They say, oh, sales has not been great. Of course it's not been great. Because nobody wants to go there. So when you look at data, right, think about all the data that's around that area. Housing agents love to put this, right? I mean, all the property sites have this. 2.5 kilometers from this, 3 kilometers from that, 300 meters from this. Really? 300 meters with no pavement, I can't walk, no. 300 meters crossing over a 4-lane highway, is no point, no, 300 meters. Right? So look at it. When you're developing as developers, think about that. Look at just a simple map. I was just talking to someone who's mapping the whole Malaysia. And look at traffic data. Where are the traffic congestion points? How do you then develop to do that? How do you then, because from traffic, you know whether that town that you're developing in that area, is it a commuting area? Is it a retirement area where you have large bungalows for older people? Is it something that somebody will invest in because there's 2-3 international schools within close proximity? What kind of houses would you build? So one of the data points, if you don't take anything away from all this today's whole session, is look at the traffic information. So you can get it from Google, you can get it from Waze. Waze has an open API. So you get your data science team to write to them, they will give you the information. The only thing is, what you can't get from Waze is historical data. So you collect from today, you start collecting from now, a year later, you get 1 year's full of Waze data, which is a lot of data, let me tell you that, right? So that's just 2 data points that you can have a look at to understand the demand, to understand, buying behaviors, movements, people movement behavior. Bukit Raja to Towle, Satya Towle now is crazy. Yeah, widening the road doesn't help because you still have a small tap at the end. Big hose, small tap doesn't help, right? So that's where you can start looking at from a data perspective.
From a property portal perspective, Prem, I mean, you've seen probably searches, and also to Setu, you've seen property searches, you've seen interest in where people are searching, what they're searching for, you've seen how many clicks, how many leads are being generated. How is that affecting your input towards the developers in terms of what's being searched, what's being of demand, or what's being of interest? Is there a two-way communication model currently?
Yeah, okay, yeah. So about 2 years ago, I mean, so I come from the background of advocating data transparency, right? Like no one should hold data as hostage, right? So because everyone thinks that data is priceless, and everyone wants data, but no one wants to share data, right? But the thing we try to advocate is data itself is not the competitive edge, but the data should be transparent. So when joined iProperty, and one of the things we wanted to do was to advocate that as well. That means we can't go around telling people that you should give data to us, but then we don't give our data back to especially our customers. You know that. So we have created tools like there's iProperty IQ, there's IQ Agent and all that, where for the first time we are releasing information of our user behavior. In fact, even our supply, of the listings back to our customers to help them kind of like make an effective decision in the sense of where do you spend, how much do you spend, where people are moving interests, where they're moving from, what sizes are they looking at, what prices are they looking at, and as a single point, the data is meaningless again because it's one-sided. It is still demand data, but like as you want to mention, intent is one thing, but actual is another thing. So that's when things like JPPH data comes in, and incoming supply data comes in, and all that to kind of verify all this information. So right now out there, I mean, about 2 years ago, none of the developers had a single portal which had access to kind of stitch up all this data. And today we have got about 10 developers using this service, not so much for marketing, but more for planning, building the right product. And we were hoping that property portal data would be a data point which developers would use, because the reality is, I think in the afternoon session they spoke about backdated data, right? I can tell you yesterday, what did the 1 million people did on our site? Today. So it's instant demand data, and we wanted to bring that out to our clients. So I think when it comes to your question, property portal data, we can help in the sense of providing demand data back to developers to use that to kind of verify, because we all know development of property is a very precise art, right? And it's built in, and they mentioned about gut feeling. So this is all just to verify that this is my gut feeling. Show me the data to verify my gut feeling. If the data verifies that, yes, I'm going to go ahead with it. And one of the biggest value for property portals is the user behavior data.
Yeah, so I would kind of echo some of the thoughts. But some of the discussions that we have had with developers, it's like, you're sharing all the supply demand, user level information, anonymized, of course, where you're trying to kind of figure out, hey, what is the profile or a persona that the person is looking for, and to do that in a forecastive manner, is kind of almost next to impossible, because there are a lot of market factors that come into play, which, for a developer, his risk is till he's able to sell some of these things. But for the banks and the end users, it's even longer term, right? So for them, it's like, hey, can you forecast 3 to 5 years? And for the banks, it becomes a completely different story. It's like, hey, what can you tell me about the users and other aspects associated with that? So the supply demand is all right, but doing it in a forecasting, like a forward-looking manner, is where some of the challenges comes into play. And more often than not, it becomes, when you look at the market around, I'm not from KL, but you look at developments in Kuala Lumpur, India, or even for that matter, Singapore, I'm going to do what the next guy did, right? I'm just going to do it slightly differently and market it slightly differently. So there are like till somebody breaks that chain, you are going to find a lot of copycat solutions which are only slightly better than what the previous guy offered.
That is what Dr. Farouk was mentioning just now.
Yeah, I mean, just a quick on Quek. That's the same with the developers, right? Everything is an eco-jungle lifestyle now. Everything is the same, right? I'm just going to do the same thing, only somewhere else. Right? It's exactly the same. Until somebody breaks that, a developer breaks that chain, it's always going to be the same kind of thing. This is the trend right now.
Yeah, I would like to share a little bit more on what can what's the take home for fellow developers here. I think we have shared a lot of initiative, a lot of ideas, but end of the day they will ask what's the cost, how to do it, and all this and that. So one just suddenly pops up in my mind that one initiative probably you can try before you leave this room is I notice every time you acquire land and you apply for a development order, okay, maybe I'm just a suggestion. You'll notice that before you start selling, you already start putting the billboards, all right, around the development area, all right. So all these are catchment of eyeballs, all right. I mean, just a suggestion. We have the tool to help you, really cross-sell. No, why don't you, I don't see any initiative at the moment like, why don't you put a URL link there? Hey, tell me what size you want. Neighborhood around that traffic. When you pass by, put a link there. Tell me what are the product you want. What are the size? Do you need furnished? Do you need, who are these people? These are the easiest that you can do. Put up a link there. Get any person who passed by and snap a photo and reward them with something. This is how you can collect data already, and these real-time data. These are the people who pass by around the neighborhood, and this should be your target buyers, right? So this is a very easy but very effective way of identifying the demand data. All right. So then from there you can actually funnel it to your process. We got a funneling process for you to understand and crunch the data, and then you work on that to, based on the rest of the NAPIC data, whatever past data, and come up with your right pricing, right product. We notice a lot of buyers sometimes, most of the time, when they buy a unit from developer, most of the time they will try to do a lot of renovation. This is actually a cost to buyers. If I buy the house or I don't need to. I straight away bring my suitcase, any of my existing sofa as well. I just move in and I can start staying in the house. So I think think out of the box to try to capture all this demand data. This is one of the area that you can do. Put up an ads on your billboards or rather around your parameters of your development. That would be a good start, right?
I'm just on collecting data. You're absolutely right. The other thing is your sales staff, right? If you look at your sales staff, that's your data collection point for me as well, right? When somebody comes in, exactly to what Quek was saying, somebody comes in and they say, oh, I'm looking for such and such. Oh, we don't have any here, right? Collect that information because that information will help you with your demand planning in the future. A lot of sales staff, when I walk in, depends on working with my family or my own, they don't collect all this information. I'm giving them a lot of information. Where do you work? Vijaya Times Square. What do you do? Right? Every single thing I'm giving them information, but they're not collecting that information. Now, the best way to collect that information is, which we've implemented in the UK, one company, is an iPad, right? A simple iPad with a list of questions, right? Occupation, big buttons, right? So when they're talking, it doesn't have to follow a script. Big buttons, occupation, house type preference, preferred location, and so on and so forth, right? Family composition, just very big buttons, right? Family composition, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Doesn't matter whether it's children or adults, right? And that will be your data collection point, which I know that when I spoke to the other developers, they didn't want to invest in because they say, the sales staff just hammer in anything random. Of course, you will get that as well, but you have to have some faith and trust in your sales staff that they will be putting in the right thing. And that's a main data collection point. I'd just like to touch on that. Google Maps traffic developer's nightmare. Is it traffic or Google Maps? In Google Maps, traffic is a developer's nightmare. That's an interesting point.
Okay. Setu, if you have anything to add, no, I will just go to the questions that's here. All right. In the closing minutes, ladies and gentlemen, I'm just going to read the questions that were posted up here. Let's see. In regards to the oversupply units in the property market, how can we tap into the rental market for demand or even short-term rental trends like Airbnb? I'm not sure whether this is a platform for this or not, but anybody got any thoughts on that? The question here is, in regards to the oversupply units in the property market, how can we tap into rental market for demand or even short-term rental trend like Airbnb? So, maybe perhaps from a developer that has units that are unsold and they want to actually monetize from those units while they wait for sales to happen, I guess. Ladies and gentlemen, I really don't know whether this is the correct platform or panel for this, but I think that if there is a market, as the Chinese say, you got money, make lah. You know, just do it lah. Okay? So anybody disagree with that? If not, we just move on to the next one. The problem with social media is that it's full of fake profiles. Can it be a credible input? Caveat emptor is my answer. Let the buyer beware.
I think you can use it as a guide. I think any data point that you take from a social perspective or collected from a customer perspective, it has to be taken as a guide and inferred, not as a true value. And I think there's a difference. If you form your own, I don't know how many of you have a data science team within your organization. When you learn about and you use data, you'll know that some data is pure measurement, some data are metrics, some data you infer, and some data you can't use at all, right? So social media data, you only need to use it as a guide and not as your endpoint.
How do you educate the public, inclusive the industry player, and increase data awareness? I guess more panel sessions like this.
Come to more events like this.
Yeah, come to more events. Rhoda, please organize another one soon. Okay. Except demographic info, what kind of data can we can collect to understand the market? I mean, guys, I think what Doctor was mentioning just now, whereby every person that you have on the ground is a source for data collection. Every touch point you have on a social platform is also a data collection point. Everybody you come in contact with as well is a data collection point. Don't waste it.
I think if I could add to that, if you look at industries that's been disrupted right now, so if you look at Airbnb, who disrupted the hospitality industry to a certain extent, Uber or Grab disrupted the taxi industry, Google, who's disrupted the search industry in a big way, Facebook, and so on and so forth. When you look at their business model is actually collecting data. They are just obsessed about collecting data. Yeah, Mark Zuckerberg came on just before we came in, and he gave a speech in New York, and he said to the investors, he says, Facebook now is going to go private. There was a laughter at the end of it, right? And that was all the news media picked up on, because he says, now we're focusing on private data. We're not going to share data anymore. Because they're focused on collecting data. So what you need as an organization is going to be quite difficult. But you're going to be obsessed with collecting data, right? Whatever data that you can collect. And you think of all the data collection points, sales staff, portals,
Customer
web
service.
traffic. Customer service, exactly, right? Surveys, billboards. Who's looking at your billboards? How do you get information from billboards? You have to think of it as a data collection point. You don't just run an event. Hey, Saturday we got big event, ICT going do this, and we got big this and all that, right? See, very digital, got time's up sign at the end in paper. And all this, right? But then, what data did you collect at the event? How many people attended? Who attended? Why they attended? What kind of houses were they looking for? Where were they looking for? As management, these are the questions you're going to ask the event organizer. What data am I collecting at the end of the event? Not, the first question is always, what's the ROI? Right? Actually, what data am I collecting is more important than the ROI. Okay?
All right, ladies and gentlemen, if there's no more questions, I'd like to call for a close. But before that, the wrap-up, I think, that was done by Dr. Farouk was actually quite apt. It's not quantity of data, it's quality of data. It's not quality of data that just sits in a bucket and you don't use it. If you don't interpret it, you don't make it actionable. It's just a bunch of information that is just left sitting in a room somewhere. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, I would call for the panel to be closed. And thank you so much for being an ardent audience. Thank you.